and welcome. My name's Michael Collins. I'm the Executive Director for the Institute for Economics and Peace. We're a non-profit, non-partisan research institute, and we're dedicated to shifting the world's focus to peace as a positive, tangible, and achievable measure of human well-being and progress. We do that through sort of quantitative research, statistical analysis, and mathematical modeling. We produce the Global Peace Index, the Global Terrorism Index, and sort of thematic reports and country-based indices like the 2021 Mexico Peace Index, the 2012 US Peace Index as well. Thank you for placing your trust in me as a moderator today. I really hope that the sessions are enjoyable for you, independently of your political view or any perspective you may have on peacefulness in the US. The title of the panel is Peace as a Vital Sign of Public Health, Building Positive Peace in the United States. So there's kind of sort of three elements that I'd like to kind of draw out of that title. The first, peace is a vital sign of public health. Now, that sort of infers that peace, not only can be measured, but can and perhaps should be sort of a defining public health metric, right? Number one, if you can measure violence, you can measure peace. Number two, by focusing on peace, you can become more aware of the attitudes and the institutions and structures that create and sustain peace. So IEP does this, for example, by statistically analyzing the world's most peaceful nations. And it's these sort of attitudes and institutions and structures that are shown to create and sustain peace that we often refer to as positive peace. And that makes up the second part of the title. Positive peace building it sort of incorporates a variety of different activities, right? From strengthening government to improving business opportunities, fomenting the acceptance of the rights of others, increasing levels of human capital, improving the free flow of information, relations with neighbors, lowering corruption, etc. Broad array. It's sort of a broader form of peace building, and it's aimed at sort of reinforcing all of the pillars that are shown to make countries and communities prosper. So, positive peace really sort of looks beyond immediate conflict resolution and law enforcement needs, and it kind of sort of seeks to build a stronger, more sustainable peace over the long term. Now, that sort of brings me to the third part of the title, the United States. Now, the truth is that when we sort of look at it globally, the US has deteriorated significantly in peacefulness over the past 10 years. It's now lower than it has been any time since 2008. In 2021, it was ranked 122nd in the Global Peace Index. That's sort of very much teetering on the edge of the bottom quarter. Over that sort of same period of time, violent crime has increased, violent demonstrations have increased, political instability, the impact of terrorism, and a number of other sort of key metrics as well. Importantly, positive peace measures, these have sort of deteriorated in the same way, in particular since sort of 2015. The country sort of recorded, I think it was the 9th largest deterioration globally, and North America as a region is the only region that's actually sort of recorded a deterioration in positive peace over that time period, the last 10 years. Especially what we sort of call the attitudes domain is the one that's most significantly sort of deteriorated. And that's like measures related to sort of socioeconomic exclusion, distribution of resources, and, the quality of information shared and received by people as well. So in short, much remains to be done. But pivoting to more positive things, and excuse the pun, I have an absolutely wonderful panel here to discuss this theme and these issues, which I'm going to allow to introduce itself in a second. Just before we do, though, we'd love to be able to engage every one of you with us today and source some of your thoughts that I think are going to help kind of sort of inform the conversation today. So I'd like to present you with a Mentimeter, which I think that we're going to be able to bring up here on screen. And you should be able to interact with that very shortly. Excellent. Thank you very much. Let's see. Should be up in a second. Absolutely wonderful. So the question is, with one word, please express your ideas, beliefs, and thoughts about the lack of peacefulness in the United States. Now, as and when you answer that, you'll see the answers pop up, which hopefully will inspire you to add further words beyond that. But at this point, and in the meantime, I would love to invite Lisa Broderick, our kind co-moderator today, to introduce herself. Take it away, Lisa.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. And so I'm Lisa Broderick. I'm Executive Director of Police to Peace. We're a national nonprofit that unites police departments and communities around programs that uplift and heal them. I would say the most striking experience we've had over the last 2 years is the intersectionality of public safety and public health. And although that's always been true, and working with police agencies and leaders around the country, they know that. And many people know that, but now the public, we all citizens, community members, it couldn't be a bigger part of our daily lives. From gun violence deaths to the pandemic, public safety and public health are inextricably intertwined. From our perspective, policing is the purpose of policing could in some sense be said community wellness. And if that's true, then of course, public health and public wellness and public safety are really all one. I'll be speaking about that a little later today and asking panelists questions, and I'm thrilled to be here.
That's absolutely wonderful, Lisa. Thank you very much. Perry.
Yes, so my name is Perry Bradley. I am the founder and CEO of an organization called Building Better Communities here in South Carolina. And we champion that fight to actually help bridge that gap between our local law enforcement and our different communities that are stricken with poverty and crime and violence. So what we do is we actually try to come up with ideas and events that include not only just the community, but as well as local law enforcement, elected officials, and organizations that partner with us to help build peaceful resolutions in our communities.
Brilliant. I'll go next. So my name is Shafin Roberts. I'm the director for the Los Angeles City Attorney's Dispute Resolution Program. And, look, my personal mission is to build purpose and understanding through bridge building strategies. So mediation, facilitation, restorative practices. I also teach at Pepperdine. I teach cross-cultural communication, and also I teach mediation theory and practice. And so that's what I do. But I do this work, and we'll talk more about the kind of work that I do at the office. But I do that work because it's a calling. It's my purpose for being here. I grew up in South LA in the 80s and 90s, and that's when the height of the drug war was happening and gang violence. And so I feel very close to a lot of things that many people, I understand why they couldn't really make it out. I have a deep empathy for the community and the unique challenges that they might face. And so this is why I'm doing this work, because it's a calling essentially for me. And I'm just happy to be here, kind of bringing things together. That's my role. So thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Shafin. Pastor Matt, who will be joining us hopefully in a few minutes, is currently not here. Jim, please take it away. Okay, well, Jim is with us, but I think is having some technical difficulty. If you don't mind me, Jim, I'm going to read your bio very quickly. Jim is a 40-year veteran of policing, served as the president of the National Police Foundation in Washington, D.C. Prior to that, he served as chief of police for the Redlands, California Police Department for 13 years until 2011. Jim is a strategic site liaison for the National Public Safety Partnership of the DOJ, and representative and close strategic advisor to Police to Peace. Jim, welcome. And I'm not sure if Pastor Matt has been able to join us at this point.
I do not see him yet.
I don't think he has. We're confident that they'll both be able to turn up. Reverend Matt Hennessy is from a senior pastor at the Vancouver Avenue First Baptist Church of Portland. Pastor Matt leads this historically African-American congregation that is in the process of becoming intentionally more multicultural, including providing programs for youth, young adults, and focus on social justice and community issues. Excellent. Thank you very much for those two panelists who we look forward to joining us.
We seem to have lost Michael.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, let us, with these introductions, Michael, are you back with us?
Yes, I think I'm.
You're not on, maybe take your camera off.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So no
Okay.
picture, but camera. How's that?
Okay, yes, that's absolutely fantastic. I'm not particularly handsome anyway, so I think this is for the best. So thank you everyone for your contributions to this word cloud. And, despite being, probably from the accent, you've noted that I'm somewhat of a foreigner. I do relate personally to a lot of the words that you have added here. And I'm absolutely sure that our panelists relate to those words as well. And, perhaps starting in the order that we introduce ourselves, I'd like to sort of pose a general question. And that's, sort of from your particular lens, right, or your role in the community, what for you, panelists, is at the heart of the issue when it comes to sort of this lack of peacefulness in the US, generally in the US, and also in your community specifically? Perry. I think we may have lost Perry.
Oh, it's just not the day for technology, huh?
Yeah. Well, we can blame this bomb cyclone that. Shafin, do you mind if I put you on the spot at this point?
No, I can go. Yeah. So, yeah, these are really awesome questions, and I do resonate with a lot of the word cloud sentiments too. But if I can, I'm going to start macro if I can, and then work into the micro, if that's okay. So, I think like on a micro level. On a macro level, we know who we are. When I say that, I'm talking about us as, Americans. And we have all types of values and things that describe and reinforce our sense of identity. But the reality is, we're always asked a greater question by life. Okay, we're talking macro here, and it's a higher power, and I call that power God. Okay, and the question is who are you, and really who are we? And it's asked in the form of situations and problems that confront us, offering us an opportunity to respond according to the nature of who we are. It's not good enough to answer with your mission statement, right? No one's interested in that. No one cares about your mission statement. We answer through our actions. And lately, what's been happening in America is that the situations are calling us to answer, and we're answering, but many of us are disappointed in the answer and how we're showing up in that space, because in the answer is the identity. And if that identity doesn't resonate with who you believe you are, then there's this incongruence that's extremely painful. So you have these two ideas about America. On the one hand, you have American exceptionalism. And on the other hand, you have a nation which is deeply broken and fractured with systemic inequities that produce very different outcomes for different groups. And so there's this identity crisis that's happening. And we're in the midst of that. And so we're trapped in this history that we don't collectively understand. And until we take the time to really unravel that, we're going to continue to be defined and controlled by it. So that's what's happening, I think, on a macro level. On a micro level, and I saw somebody in the chat, one of the words was, I think it was silos or something. It reminded me of this point. I was like, yeah, exactly. So then on a micro level, you have this technology that throws gas on the issue. Now, if you guys haven't seen this documentary, it's called The Social Dilemma, I think. You got to check it out. I mean, because it talks about what I believe is a kind of bringing it to the core here. The power of these algorithms that social media or these networks use, that keep feeding information that reinforces our particular perspective. And it's destructive, to building any kind of understanding across any difference, right? It's like giving a child more and more candy, you're going to end up with a sick child. And when you give people only the ideas that reinforce their existing belief system, they're in an echo chamber of only one aspect of reality. It's like, you guys recall Plato's allegory of the cave. It's like they only know one perception of truth. And so when the guy leaves the cave and he's like, man, these shadows, this isn't it. There's something more real. So now he has a different perspective, and he tries to go back and explain it to the other people in the cave, and they're like ready to kill him. So this is what's happening today in social media. People have been in their social network caves for so long, you can't tell them what they know now is truth is not true. And if you do, they're going to attack. And it's sad, but we're drifting wider and wider apart because we can curate our diet of ideas. And finally, it comes in. So that's really what's happening. Finally, when we think about the police in the community, which is kind of the focus of my work, I think honestly there's just a lack of a lack of belief, and a belief that change is possible, that understanding is possible, that change can happen. And without belief, there's no will, and nothing changes for good. Actually, nothing changes for good without effort. And so it's a desperate situation. And so that's where I'm at.
That's excellent, Sharp, and thank you very much. And I kind of sort of loved how you brought up the existential component, because I mean I do feel, especially from seeing on the work cloud, that very much kind of sort of sums everything up. And this kind of sort of this disappointment almost, right, about, oh, I thought that we were more than this, you know. And personally, I mean, I do tremendously agree with this technological element, which we you know, to a certain extent we see through the research. And just something I was personally thinking about this morning was that, and I don't know if this is the first time in history, it probably isn't, it's probably part of one sort of long cycle, but you know, I've tuned out to a lot of different news networks, and I've just sort of noticed how news networks are now turning against other news networks, right? So you're creating these echo chambers, and you're creating these situations that that I think nobody really knows, you know, what's going to happen. And just to close on kind of sort of the lack of belief, you know, I personally think that part of that is that people don't also necessarily see the things that are working very well. And that being able to sort of do that and highlight that more might be of distinct benefit, which is why hopefully Section 2 is going to bring us about in the positive framing. Sharfin, thank you very much. Perry, I'd love to hand it over to you at this point.
Okay, yeah, I believe exactly as he said before, you know, it's actually kind of disappointing where we are right now. If you look back at it, I can't believe that we've done a lot of the things to each other that we've done. When you talk about the crime, you talk about the violence that we have. I mean, babies getting killed senselessly, women. You know, there used to be a time when, you know, even in criminal activity, women and children were off limits. Now, nothing is off limits. And I believe that we've just lost sight of just who we are. Our morals are gone. And, you know, the work that we do here with gun violence, it would bring you to tears a lot of times. There's many nights I go home and I'm thinking like, wow, how could somebody possibly do this? You know, there are so many different aspects of our what we do in the community that, you know, you have to start thinking, well, if you're going to say where we're going to go from here and you're looking at where we are now, you know, the problem is, like you said, how do we get here? How do we go from families to gangsters overnight? And I think social media and media does play a role in it. You know, one of the biggest things I do a lot of reading, and with it, I don't know if you guys recall, but you know, Dr. King had the triple evils. I don't know if you guys remember that: poverty, racism, and militarism. And so when you look at it right now, poverty, even in today, you know, we're faced with that: unemployment, homelessness, hunger, malnutrition, illiteracy, infant mortalities. You know, we are facing all of that. These slums, you know, I know in South Carolina, we have a lack of, you know, affordable housing. So you have a lot of people that are out in the streets. And then we look at racism. We just left, you know, I don't want to get into politics, but we just left a presidency that really strongly pushed a lot of racial issues to the forefront and really let us see who our neighbors are. You know, George Floyd, we had to deal with that in this era, which I thought we would never get to see, you know, but we're there. And then we talk about militarism. People think about that as being the armies, but really they don't understand. That's domestic violence. That's the gun violence we see. That's rape, terrorism, human trafficking, media violence is considered that, drugs, you know, child abuse, you know, and the violent crimes we see. So when I look at it, you know, I'm trying to figure out, how do we get here? Why haven't we advanced past these issues that Dr. King saw back in his day that we're constantly seeing over and over and over again? So I'm looking forward to actually learning and figuring out ways to actually fix and combat this issue.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Perry. And I mean, there's sort of a couple of things that you said there that really sort of resonated with me, and perhaps building on what Sharfin said also, the, you know, the moral component, right? And kind of sort of like the desperation. I mean, I think in some respects, you know, kind of sort of people are seeing that the traditional sort of supportive structures that are usually around you, right, that allow you, that provide you with that moral compass, are kind of sort of crumbling in many ways, right? So, that kind of sort of shining light, that guide is missing more and more. And, you highlighted sort of the number of things that are contributing to conflict. And lastly, sort of the militarization component. I mean, just going back to some of sort of the data that IEP manages, the United States is the country with the highest level of small gun ownership in the world, and, you can have 1,000 debates about, what is the appropriate amount of, gun possession and when it's appropriate or when it's not. But nonetheless, it is a symptom, right? It is indicative of that lack of peacefulness around the world. Thank you very much, Perry. Jim, if you're here with us and can connect, we'd love to hear from you. Pastor Matt is here. Pastor Matt, welcome. It's wonderful to have you. I did introduce you using your bio. I also noted a footnote on your bio which said bio is incomplete and needs to be filled out. You're welcome to fill that out more at this point, and to respond to sort of the first general question, which I'll just repeat for your benefit. From the lens of your role in the community, what is at the heart of the issue for you when it comes to the lack of peacefulness in the US generally and in your community in particular? Pastor Matt. Pastor Matt, we can't hear you if you're currently trying to speak. Okay, excellent. Well, I'm sorry, we seem to still be having some technical difficulties. What I think we can probably do at this point, Pastor Matt, are you there? Well, nonetheless, Shafin and Perry, I think that you kind of sort of really helped set the tone, as did our audience today, for kind of sort of how did we get here, which we'd consider to be sort of the first section of this. And for the second section, which I'd like, to the extent feasible, to be able to sort of shift in a more positive direction in terms of what we are currently doing to be able to address a number of the challenges that you were talking about. I would like to hand it over to my esteemed colleague, Lisa Broderick. Lisa.
Michael, everyone, thank you so much. It has been quite a morning and an afternoon as we face all these challenges, but that really is a lot of what we've been facing as a country. Nothing really works, right? And I think that's what we notice. And so what we're moving to is, from all of those, the discussions and the stories shared, et cetera, from Shafin and Perry and others, the real question is, where are we now, right? And so what would be great for the audience, people in the audience, why don't you share via chat your knowledge of a particularly impactful community cohesion experience, something that happened that really caught you off guard, that really made you think that peace is possible. We use that phrase a lot, peace is possible, and we represent hope for change through everything that's happening. So sharing in the chat what a story, some incident of a particularly impactful community cohesion or peace building program that you may have experienced. And so now we'll go to the panelists. And Perry, you were going to show something, which was a video clip of a recent news story that happened in Columbia, South Carolina. You go ahead and do that.
Yes, ma'am, I will. So I'm gonna just give you a brief heads up on this video. Basically, this shows 2 years ago until 2 days ago. And this is where we are. So I'm about to share that now.
Columbia Police Department says its officers have taken 48 illegally possessed guns since New Year's Day. Yesterday, Richland County deputies said that 12 guns were stolen from cars just over the weekend.
As WIS Chief Investigative Reporter Chris Joseph reports, this data puts a new emphasis on the issue of illegal guns in our community.
The Columbia Police Department and the Richland County Sheriff's Office have been outspoken about the issue of illegally possessed guns in the community. This new information shows the issue is not going away. It's no secret local law enforcement is working on ways to curb violence and the prevalence of illegally owned guns.
As an agency, our focus has been very surgically focused on gun crime. And that's not just the specialized units, that's from the patrol units on the street.
The Columbia Police Department is utilizing a series of strategies to take them off the streets, including a photo campaign showing the weapons officers have seized. On Tuesday, the department added 11 photos to its January file and reports 48 guns have been seized this year through Monday. One of CPD's partners in this effort is Perry Bradley with Building Better Communities, who says it comes down to resources.
Do you really think someone chooses who has resources to go out and break the law? Why would you do that? So if you have the proper resources, that takes away your urge to go out and just steal guns for money and things like that. Because at the end of the day, what they're doing is trying to compensate for something that's missing. So whatever resources that they don't have, they get it in the streets. Leaving the guns in your cars, that's easy money. People don't realize just how much a gun goes for on the street, but they can take a gun out of a car and make about $400 or $500 just selling that one gun.
Bradley says his team is looking to connect the community with jobs to alleviate that issue, but for now, he is stressing a simple fix: keeping guns out of cars. The department sent me a statement saying that 2021 is on track to meet or exceed previous years in illegal gun possession charges. Reporting in Columbia, Chris Joseph, WIS.
All right, I'm back. So as you guys can see, one of the biggest things we fight is gun violence, of course, in our community. And I hope I'm back because I see everybody's out. But so what we see, honestly, is that there's a big issue when it comes to creating peace in our community, because we're faced with so many discouraging facts of violence is just prevalent. You try to fight violence one way, and that's by providing resources, but the resources are limited or they're not properly distributed in the right areas. So what we're trying to do now, like I said before, where we're heading is actually trying to get the many resources that I hear about and we read about and we see about, trying to get those resources to the individual organizations and to the groups that are actually going to help make a difference when it comes to preventing this violence in the streets.
Perry, thank you. And so is that really where things are? It is the key to peace in the community is getting the guns off the streets, as you would say, yeah, and the systemic issues related to that.
I would think so. That is one issue. There's so many things that lead up to gun violence that we don't realize. So that is more like the end result, and but that's not something that's the lead. That's not the cause of it. You got to think of why does somebody think that they need a gun, and that's the biggest thing. But gun violence goes way beyond just what we think of, like shoot 'em up, bang bang type situations. You have many guns being used in domestic violence situations. Conflict resolution is going to be key to a lot of these things, because when it's used in domestic violence, that the rate of suicide increases when you have a gun inside the home. So we have to make sure that we're figuring out ways to bring these numbers down. But in order to do that, you have to come up with solutions to actually why is society so violent right now.
Yes, and so the gun issue is clearly one which is facing so many major cities. And Shafin, I know that in your work you have a lot of experience around that issue. So where are we now from your perspective, from your work and from your life's work?
First of all, I want to just say, yeah, man, just humbled, Perry, man. It's awesome work. That's really cool, and I totally agree with everything you're talking about, especially when you talk about the underlying issues, because you got to really talk about that. And if we could, I'd love to kind of cue up the video that I'd love to play for you guys, if we can. And as we get that going, I'll set it up. What I want to play is, I said earlier that I run the mediation program for the city attorney's office, a program that's especially dear to me. I was thankful and blessed to be able to kind of be there in the beginning and help structure it. It's called the Community Police Unification Program. This is where we mediate with law enforcement officers when there's been an allegation from the community of bias and discourtesy. And so we sit down with the community member and the officer, and we have these difficult conversations, but and usually there's a really great outcome. And so this video here, if we can get it queued up, is the video of our mediators, and they're from the community. I train them, not just. Well, actually, I do. I'm one of the lead trainers, but there's other trainers that train them too. But they come from the community. We train them, and they just give their time. They're just, they're the heart, and I say they're the heart, and they're the best part of Los Angeles. So hopefully we can get that going. Perfect, excellent.
I think that it's the greatest opportunity right now on the table, the greatest platform for us to be able to use to allow those officers and people who are in authority an opportunity to know the community a little better and gain the trust that we need again with our departments.
Okay, so the dialogues that happen in these mediations to me is very special. I think you can't have that dialogue out in the streets. If a cop stops a person for whatever reason to ask questions or broken tail light or whatever, you can't have that dialogue in the street. You need a forum. How do you get that forum? And your program provides that.
Well, the role of the mediator is to be the third party neutral, which means that we help guide the conversation between the two parties. We don't decide who's right or wrong.
Everything isn't all bad. I mean, it's actually, there's a lot of hope and possibility. This program represents that, and I get a chance to see it. If you can affect change on a small level, on any level, that means it's possible on every level. And so I'm just like, look, if this can happen here, it can happen on a greater scale. We just have to keep at it and keep hopeful.
CP work is important because it gives parties that would not normally have a conversation the opportunity to talk about a subject. When you have a community member that's filed a complaint, when they file that complaint, mediation really isn't in their mind. They want somebody to take notice that they're not happy about something. But it opens a door for them to have a conversation with an officer. So I look at it, it's an opportunity for them to learn more, to be open to finding out why an officer acted the way he did, and it's an opportunity for a police officer to understand the perspective of somebody that wasn't happy with their interaction. So when you have that opportunity to have that conversation, it's very valuable.
Brilliant. I love my mediators. They're just again, I mean, they have that heart. So they're talking about this great program, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we even set the table, because you have to think about to get law enforcement in the community to the table, we have to answer the question, what do they want, right? So if we're talking about maybe doing this in other places, you think, well, why are people even coming to the table? So law enforcement, you got to think, they're interested, and I'm not saying that there's some people that don't genuinely care about having a conversation with the community and making it be transformative, but the reality of it is they're there because they want freedom from the bureaucracy of law enforcement. And we offer that through easing the administrative complaint process for them, right? So this mediation process is a lot less complicated than the administrative complaint process, which is pretty aggressive and abusive for the officers. Now, the community, what do they want? Why are they at the table? Well, they want their pain to have meaning. And so think about this. When something happens to you that's like disruptive or traumatic, the first question is why. One of them is, well, why me? What's going on? And so we offer this by providing a space for this authentic communication with the officers and capturing lessons that are then fed back to the system for course correction, essentially, right? So that's what so what it's about is we're going to find out what happened to you, and we're going to extract the lessons that we're learning during this process, and feed it back to that system so that hopefully it can learn and change moving forward. Right. So that's just the first part. Bring them to the table is the first part. And then that's, if you can, then this is the power and the beauty of mediators, because once they're there, great things can take place and transformations can occur. But it's a magical process when it goes well. So I'll give you a quick example. So there was a CPU mediation with a community member who lived in this area called the Jungle, actually, in Los Angeles. And so if you've seen the movie Training Day, and where Denzel was like, King Kong ain't got nothing. King Kong ain't got, be whatever he was doing. So that's the Jungle, right? And that's actually that's not too far from my house, right? And so and this is where the community member is from, right? This is where the community member is from. He's had some really bad dealings with LAPD. This is also where there was something called the Rampart scandal, which is where it happened primarily in that area. Which is what the movie Training Day was all about. And so he's about my age, and so he's seen some bad things, and then he also talked about the bad things he experienced with officers. And the officer who's got at the table, the officer, he came from a military family. The officer actually graduated from high school, went into the military, and then immediately joined LAPD. So he's dedicated his life to service, right? And so they had this interaction, and there was a complaint, and now we're at the table. And so during the mediation, the officer is sharing his version in perspective about what happened, and you could just see the community member, he is not liking what he's hearing. His body language shifts, and he kind of just leans forward and looks. I wish you could see he just leans forward and looks at the ground. He just looks at the ground, and the officer says, "See, look at him, so disrespectful. He can't even look me in the eyes." And so the community member, he shoots up immediately, clearly upset and offended. And I'm like, okay, whoa, okay, all right. So I said, okay, let's pause and talk about this. And this is where I said, okay, to the officer, I said, you grew up in a military family. My dad served in the military, and I'm assuming he would say the same thing to you, which is, or you've heard the same thing, which is, it's a sign of respect to look into the person's eyes when you're talking to them. He said, yeah. He nodded and said, yeah. I said, but see, you're saying some things that the community member doesn't agree with. And so he's actually showing respect by not interrupting or leaving the mediation, and he's managing his emotions by actually staying here and staring at the floor, right? And at that moment, by the way, the community member is nodding yes. This guy's like, yes. The officers, and the officer says, you know what? I didn't see it that way. I didn't even see it that way. And the community member's like, yeah, that's exactly what's happening. And so this is the power. So in that moment, and literally it's in that moment, we stopped talking about the details of the thing. It was more about this explosion that happened. And we were able to find some understanding in that moment. And in that moment, it was like, okay, I don't get it. I don't get it. And I see this piece different. I see you differently now. We ended up talking about them, wanting to kind of hang out together because, the officer hadn't had that exposure to the community in that way, in this intimate friendship type way. And the community member wasn't necessarily gung-ho about it, but he was open to it. And I was encouraging. I said, this is how we change. And this is the power of mediation where, a greater understanding between the parties can emerge. So that's, I think that's the kind of work. And again, it's not one thing that's going to be a panacea, but it's things like this that begin to shift and change their narrative, step by step.
I want to say something real quick, if you don't mind, Lisa.
Of course.
That brought up a lot of what we do, and I'm gonna tell you why. You have to find that common ground where the community is understanding where law enforcement comes from, and law enforcement is understanding where the community comes from. Things that you were kind of brought up in one home doing, somebody else may not have been. And that misunderstanding, that misrepresentation is what leads to a lot of the violence I see in these streets. And it's not just between law enforcement, it's between individuals as well. Some people see that if you don't look me in my eye, that's a sign of disrespect, when some people are literally not used to looking you in your eye, even if they're friends. Whether they are shy or whether they were just looking someone in the eye sometimes is intimidating to them. And I had to learn that. And that was some things those are little quirks that you have to learn when you're working in the community, that you have to, and I promise you, the work that you're doing is great because it's needed. You have to show them that we come from different communities, different cultures, different elements. So one thing may be disrespectful to you. In reality, the person is not being disrespectful. It's just who they are. So you have to figure out that common language between the two. And that sometimes can be very stressful.
Beautiful. Let me just, I just want to kind of echo this point, and I'll pass it back to you, Lisa and Michael. But you're right. You're so right, because in the community that I'm from, South LA, if you look at somebody too long, it's like a challenge. It's like, I'm sorry, partner, you got a problem? And it's like, that's where it goes. And so so it's not, like you said, this cultural dynamic and understanding that one thing doesn't mean the same thing, depends on context, depends on so many different areas. So you're absolutely right. And the work so anyway, I just want to say this is why we're having this conversation, and why why the work is so valuable. So thank you.
Well, Shafin and Perry, that is so, what you brought up is so important. And the way I think of it is, in order to solve a problem, we have to identify the problem. We have to understand the problem. And what you're bringing up is what America has gone through in the last 2 years is a better understanding and a deeper understanding of the problem. Because if it's never brought to light, if none of these things are brought to light, then we can't do anything to really address them or solve them, whether it has to do with the police, community interaction, the roots of gun violence, and all the other issues we brought up. Before we bring in Jim, who I believe we can see and hear now, Pastor Matt, are you able to unmute yourself and speak?
I think so. Can you hear me now?
Wow. Yes. Okay. Welcome.
Very good. Thank you so much. I feel very, very honored to be here. And I want you to know I came fresh preaching a sermon for one of our elder mothers' funeral service just now. So I actually needed this time just to calm down from the sermon that I just gave, but I got a chance to listen to both Perry and to Shafin, and I couldn't agree more with both of them. I'd like to share, if I can, just quickly sort of where I come from so that Michael and others know that. I actually was a police commissioner and a fire commissioner in Saginaw, Michigan years ago. So I led police and fire. I was a city manager, State Department director working for a governor of Oregon, and also a global leader at Nike for 9 years, and then led a company, a privately held company, for 9 years as well. And then the last 17 years, I've been the senior pastor of Vancouver Avenue First Baptist Church in Portland. It's actually an historic church, the only largely African-American church that is on the National Register of Historic Places, and the only church in all of Oregon that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. preached 60 years ago, in November of 1961. And I had the pleasure of being and working with and being the godson to Coretta Scott King, which was a real joy. So when I think about sort of how we got here, if I can do this really quickly, I promise I will. You don't expect preachers to be able to talk that fast, I know, but I think I can do this. One of the biggest issues, I think, and again, I think Perry and Shafin have probably raised it, is we don't equip our young people and our young adults with good conflict resolution skills. That absence is not good, both in our school system and to be able to use it at home. Also, I believe that one must literally be intentional about peace and to recognize, because I remember even going to school myself, we were determined to resolve everything without a fight. And if you are determined to not have a fight, it's no different than police officers who say, you know what, when I come up to somebody's car, it's going to go well. And that intention changes almost everything. We also have to deal with the issues of marginalization, because we have people coming from communities where there is no hope. We've got officers, some, who literally are more concerned about protecting themselves than about their community, and that there are too many guns on the street and there's not enough trust between police and community. Drugs, lack of resources, mental health, and the list is long in terms of how we got here. In terms of where we go, we started the Interfaith Peace and Action Collaborative almost 6 years ago. We brought it together saying that we wanted people of faith to come together. And by the way, when I say of faith, it doesn't mean I go to church, you go to church every Sunday or go to Bible study. It means that you have a faith, however you are centered. And so around our table are people who go to a formalized church or synagogue or mosque, as well as people who are Buddhist, who are from Church of Scientology, to people who go to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and to some people who have said that they're atheists. And they said, are you going to have room for me at the table? And the answer is yes, we have room for you at the table. So in terms of where we go from here, I believe that the faith community has a big voice and ought to be using the big voice. When you think about some of the great things that happened in the civil rights movement, they happened because they were centered in a faith-based community. And I believe that faith-based is very important. I also believe that as faith-based people, we need to be welcoming of everybody. Let me try that one more time. Y'all didn't get it. Of everybody. And what's important is that people are able to come and share their truth. What's been great, and Lisa has actually had the opportunity to see some of this, Shafin, you may have as well. We had officers long before George Floyd who have admitted that they need to do better, or that they need to apologize to community, or to talk about the things that they wish they had done differently and better. I believe that we're on a wonderful trajectory at this point to really say we all own this. We all want to do everything that we can to make sure the future is better than the past. And again, I believe that as we look at where we're headed, we want to make sure. I led for 6 years and was on the board for 10 years, the importance of conflict resolution all the way back to early childhood. And that the more we are focused on things like that, the better our outcomes will be. And we're also supporting in our state 2 referendums that we want for the November ballot. One is refining who gets a gun in the first place, and the other is to reduce the amount of ammunition in the magazine. So we've got work to do, but the good news is we can do this, and we can all do this together. Thank you so much.
Pastor Matt, thank you so much for those words in terms of where we are now and helping frame the problem. And I think we can hear from Chief Jim now, and that is, I know that you think about things in terms of problem solving and problem-oriented policing. Do you want to say a few words about where we are now in terms of framing the problem? Whoa. 1 second, we're not able to hear you. We should be. Do you have a mic icon in your upper left of your screen? Is it? It's on? Oh my goodness.
I had to go to my settings, to the button that looks like a tool, and make sure that it recognizes what your audio is.
So so on the upper middle, there's a settings, and then it can recognize what your what the audio is.
If those are AirPods he have in his ear, it may be trying to connect with those. He may want to just take them and put them in the case and let the device use the phone audio.
Right. Well, I think he jumped off in order to look at his settings. And so what we can do now, thinking about all of these different questions, I'll turn it back over to Michael, because we've been in the past and we've been in the present. And I think speaking a little bit about where we go from here in terms of the future, what remains to be done would be a great way to finish this out. Michael?
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Lisa, and thank you very much, everyone. And I see some very interesting questions coming in through the chat. Please keep those questions coming. We'll address them, if not at the top of the hour, shortly after. There's, a variety of kind of sort of things came through my mind. But in terms of kind of sort of framing the final section, which is, you know, what remains to be done, although we have kind of sort of been outlining that. You know, Perry, you sort of talked about the meat, right? And you know, how, you know, in this case, gun violence or gun possession, you know, is the bone, but the meat around that is what drives people to not only possess guns, but obviously to use them as well, right? And other needs. And, you know, you cited, you know, very simply the availability of resources, which I assume to be socioeconomic opportunity. You know, Shafin, you kind of sort of talked about mediation. And I mean, one of the elements of mediation is that its whole ethos is to strive to sort of get to those underlying needs that potentially aren't necessarily visible from the get-go, but are in many cases, you know, equally if not more important. And, you know, they can also be punctual and superficial. I mean, I love the example that you gave about you know, one of the great benefits of mediation for the police officers was the fact that it made administration a lot easier. And those are important needs. And, you know, we've done quite a bit of work with police in Mexico, for example. And, you know, one of the spaces that police officers, you know, don't have a lot of the time is an acknowledgement of the work, and also asking what is it that they expect from the community and how they feel that they should be treated as well. And, you know, just kind of sort of creating the space and the opportunity to be able to have that discussion is of significant value. But to get to my point, it also helps identify the variety of other factors that can contribute over time to these higher levels of peacefulness. And of course, Pastor Matt, you know, a wonderful contribution, and thank you for buoying us up and you know, your comments about we own this, and that in some ways we are on a wonderful trajectory because we are starting to kind of sort of take more ownership of the situation. I like specifically that you highlighted the ballot and the opportunity that we all have as Americans, or I'm not sure in the case of residents what the situation is, but the opportunity to be able to affect policy, to be able to change legislation, whether that be locally or nationally as well, something that we can all do. In terms of kind of sort of what remains to be done, you know, when sort of preparing for the session, I sort of asked you to reflect systemically on peacefulness in the US and in your community and in relation to your work as well. And sort of in the introductory remarks, I sort of talked about these, you know, the pillars of positive peace, so to speak, and how they come together to kind of sort of really effectively build and sustain peace over time. And, you know, understanding that there's lots of people in the audience that are joining us today that have different areas of focus, but are nonetheless contributing to these key sort of pillars of positive peace. What are the elements of your work that you think are, you know, that there are potential gaps or new things that you think can or should be included beyond what you are already doing that you feel are significantly important? I mean, for example, Pastor Matt, you talked about, you know, equipping youth in a variety of different ways. This would speak to what we call at IEP the high levels of human capital sort of pillar of positive peace. I'd love to hear your general thoughts about what are the other areas that need to be focused on beyond perhaps the ones that we've discussed until now. And I'd like to make it a round robin for anybody who's feeling inspired. Please take it away.
I'm happy to go if somebody else doesn't want to.
Go for it.
Okay, cool. So I'll say like this, you know, I think, you know, beyond building compassion, which I think, you know, needs to start locally. I think we need to have a super hyper local focused approach, especially when we talk about law enforcement. I think there's wisdom in the community that we don't tap into, and like the traditional law enforcement approach is that they're there to enforce the law, and they know what they do, they know how they do it, and if you don't cross these lines, you'll be safe. And so the goal is safety. And the navigators taking us there are the police. And so if we change that slightly and begin operating under a different assumption that both the community and law enforcement want the same thing, then I think this can be a starting point to something interesting and different. Because the community, they want a safe and healthy, prosperous community too. And so does the law enforcement, right? And so if we should be shaping the relationship between law enforcement and the community and tailoring it to the community's needs, which are unique to them. They're not a monolith, right? So like each geographic area, law enforcement might be a bit different, and it should. And that should be done in partnership with the community. And so when things fall apart, like, hey, you know, we had an agreement that when you stop somebody, you're going to do these things, you're going to tell them why, X, Y, whatever, and things didn't happen. So now this person feels targeted. Then we're going to have a mediation about that, or some other system or part of the agreement is falling apart. Like there should be really like agreements on how we're going to approach crime in this community, or approach whatever in this community, peace in this community. And so there are ways to maintain even strengthen these relationships with law enforcement using bridge building techniques and strategies like, you know, mediation, facilitation, which is what I'm, you know, focused on, because both sides want to be valued and heard and respected. And I get it on both sides, but we're going to have a different approach, I think, to begin to start again and accomplish the same goals, but with different outcomes. Right. And then I want to just add this piece, which is not necessarily in the work that I do, but it's a passion of mine. I think that this might be the most important thing. And Perry alluded to it. It really it's I think sustained community development that allows for the collective participation of value growth, not gentrification. So what happens in a lot of these communities, you get you know, people being displaced, and they can't participate in the growth economically that's happening in their community because maybe they have a house, they're like, you know, millionaires on paper, but they can't access that, right? And so I think we need to be thinking of ways that we can allow the community to participate in the growth economically that's happening, that it oftentimes does happen and sometimes even doesn't, because they're so disinvested in these communities, because people, they behave differently when there's a pride of ownership, there's a sense of real value. You know, you talk to a homeowner, no matter where, they have a different conversation with you than somebody who might, you know, have no attachment to the community, right? So like when the whole Rodney King thing happened, and I'll share this and I'll be done. What happened was, I was there, the community was burnt down. And when I went, another part of my background is I went to private school, and it was primarily very affluent people, white folks, and, you know, really, really kind people, but they were asking me, why are you burning down your community? Why are you burning down your community? And my instinct, like my first response was, it's not our community. They're not burning down the houses that they own, they burn down businesses that they don't. And so I feel we have to find a way to include the community in the growth economically of these of their neighborhoods. And then with that, I think you have a different outcome. And now, obviously, along with that you have education, financial literacy, health and wellness, and these things that, you know, need to be wrapped around in that as well. And that's my 2 cents. That's what I think.
By the way, that's more than 2 cents, Shafin. That's like, you know, $1 million worth of stuff. That was excellent, brother. If I could add to that, I think what Shafin has raised is great. And so I will see this as adding a paragraph to what he's already said. I do think that it's important that we have a mindset and an intention about peace. If we really watch this. When in Portland, we've had police officers come into community meetings and will start off before they make a presentation and say, I want to apologize for the things that we have done that have caused harm in your community. Believe me, that sets a far different tone in a meeting between police and community when there is that. What about the police? When I was the police commissioner, when I came in to rooms with community, I say, I come in peace. I want to be able for us to have a peaceable dialogue and a peaceable relationship with one another. And it makes a difference. In Portland, we have something called the Portland Peace Initiative that Lisa is leading right now. And that initiative is to meet with as many people across the city as want to come together with their friends, 6, 7, 12 people, to really have a listening session to hear about how people want to be served by their police bureau. And as a result of that, ultimately, we will have recommendations that will go to community groups as well as the city council to say, here are some changes that need to be made. My third is really the whole model needs to change of policing. I honestly believe that it is so important to infuse lay people, non-sworn people in police bureaus, both for an understanding and an opportunity to get to know how policing is, because I assure you, if you're not in policing. It is really difficult to understand it. And part of the barrier between police and community is that there isn't enough cross-pollination that goes on. But I believe, and our mayor has heard us now, because he asked for 300 new officers, but he asked for 100 new non-sworn people that are going to respond to mental health calls that don't require a police response, or people that are going to do things that the police would rather not do. And to remember that, yes, finally, this is my last piece, and that is that something much needs to be done about not just having an inflection point and white communities and black communities and brown communities and everybody comes together and says, oh, ain't it awful, and here's what we need to do. We've got to do that sustainably. This is an old problem. This is a mindset and fought. And I know a lot of people will say, well, I'm not racist. I'm not this. We're not trying to say you are. We're just trying to say that there are serious disparities that need to be dealt with. And as long as those disparities are not dealt with, we will continue to have the cycle of violence, hopelessness, and everything else that we have right now. And just like Shafin said, there are a lot of people who say, why are you burning down this? Why are you doing that? Because they have no connection to it. The same is true. If people were more working at police bureaus, they wouldn't knock them down either. They wouldn't set them on fire. So I think we need to think about that ownership piece. And again, I will just end, Michael. And again, I'm grateful to be here to be a part of this. But I really want you to know that I believe that we are on a great trajectory. We can do this. We may not live long enough to see a lot of the change we're talking about. But if we plant these seeds, the next generation will have a greater opportunity than they do right now.
Awesome. I guess if nobody else, I'll go next because I want to add what you said is honestly hit the nail on the head. So I know a lot of you may not know, but BBC, my organization, Building Better Communities, has partnered with law enforcement at Richland County Sheriff's Department as well as the City of Columbus Police Department. One of the best things I've seen so far, Sheriff Lott has taken the initiative. And what he did is to better handle non-criminal calls, Richland County Sheriff's Department partnered with the Department of Mental Health so that there's actually a mental health worker that arrives with a deputy that handles these calls. Now, that's great, but BBC actually took it a step further when we created what we call the BBC Community Ambassador Program. So not only will you get a BBC member that's able to, like you said, mediate between the community and law enforcement, but you will also have a pastor. So whether it's a pastor, a rabbi, someone of the faith that comes out into the community that knows how to doctorate anything that needs to be done on that level. And also we team up with a mental health professional as well. So those 4 people create our ambassador program per community. And, you know, I look at the fact that a lot of people don't realize this. People genuinely want to be helpful. You know, how many times have you walked into a grocery store or to a convenience store, or somebody you didn't know held the door for you, said hello, or did something for you? No matter how hard they look or what background they come from, people generally want to help. So when you talk about those things you were talking about earlier about making sure that the police change their mindset, you're right. We have to form those relationships, but you can't expect police to do it by themselves. The community has to also step in and meet them halfway. So I think, you know, by forming this relationship where you have a community member from the nonprofit organization that's helping with like translating, like, hey, this guy doesn't mean to be aggressive. This is just how we are. Because truth be told, we can be very aggressive in how we talk, even disrespectful sometimes, but it's just how we are raised. And then law enforcement, you don't know how somebody's having a bad day or whatever, but when you have all those people combined, and a lot of it's volunteer, so it's not taking money out of the community, a lot of it's volunteer work, then you come up with better resolutions when you go into neighborhoods that tend to come off with more friction between community and law enforcement.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Perry. And I'm going to make one last try to see. I'm sure Jim has a tremendous amount of stuff to say that may or may not be possible. Jim, any chance that we can connect with you?
No.
And Jim is my hero. My hero, because he's done some of this great work. He really has.
Well, I definitely like to lift my hat to Jim as well. I know that he's deeply involved in these initiatives and a number of other ones as well. And I know he's deeply committed to the cause and has been for the last 30 or 40 years. Jim, thank you very much for attending today. Please feel free to contribute to the chat, to add questions in there as well. We're going to be opening up for questions right away. In fact, I mean, I just wanted to sort of touch on a couple of things. Yes.
Michael, is it possible to say one thing for Jim's behalf?
Please.
Jim instituted in his town that he was the chief of, a phrase on the police card that says, "We are peace officers," something like that. And when somebody stopped a police officer to say, "What does that mean in terms of how you show up?" they said, "It's not about what it does to the other person. It's the mindset that it creates in me. That when I show up on the scene, I am a peace officer, not just a police officer. And my job is to do everything that I can to make this go right." I mean, he is amazing. And I'm hoping somehow, some way in the future, there's a way to get him involved here, or his audio to work, because he's implemented a number of the things that we've been talking about here.
Well, I would love to use that as a segue to bring Lisa in this point. Lisa, I know obviously that Jim works extremely closely with you, and I'm very familiar with the with the Police to Peace, peace officer project. I know it wasn't planned, but it would be wonderful to be able to hear a tiny bit more about that. I know that there's been notable success. Could you tell us a tiny bit more?
Well, thank you. Yes, and actually Perry Bradley's familiar with the program as well, as the Richland County Sheriff's Department was the first sheriff's department to institute the program department-wide back in 2018. It's a program which is designed to shape the attitudes and behaviors of both the community and the law enforcement agency around peace. And I thought of something simply when I transitioned from a career where I was basically a high technology CEO into a nonprofit where I really wanted to make a difference. When you introduce the word peace into a community, it's like a technology. In fact, Jim used a disruptive technology. People see peace officer on a uniform or a badge or a vehicle, and they ask first of all, they think to themselves, what is that and why? And second, the officer is asked the question and has to respond. And third, the officer looks at it every day. So you're looking at this word peace, and we all know that words matter. Words on billboards matter, words that we say matter, and words that people see matter. So this idea of introducing peace into the community is framed all around this issue, and that is, how can we show up for a situation in our minds, in our hearts, if you will. And Jim has taught me for the last many years, policing is a very spiritual profession. People don't run into danger and choose professions in so many senses just because of fast cars and weapons. Although they may do that as well, but it's a very spiritual profession. So how do we show up when we've had a bad day, when we've seen something awful, as Perry described right before this session, and show up and continue to come from a place of compassion? And the idea is that we could introduce peace, which is why I'm so interested in the phrase, peace is a vital sign of public health, where policing in some sense is about the health of and the wellness of the community. And that's what the Peace Officer program is about.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Lisa. And I had a number of notes to comment on from all of your contributions, but I'm just going to use Perry's final note about it being the small things. I mean, it's terrible because it's the small things, but it's wonderful because it's the small things. It means that we can all be a peace builder. And Lisa, you gave a wonderful example of that, the simple introduction of peace as being something that can be tremendously impactful. The simple introduction of something like, good morning, how are you? I hope you have a great day. It's nice to see you. can make a really big difference. We're going to jump straight into questions here, and I have a couple of very interesting ones. The first one, Shafin, is for you specifically, and I'll let me just see if I can't. It says, this is from Peter Digitale Anderson. It says, typically mediation is most effective when the parties at the table are relatively balanced in power. Now, police officers inherently have more social and legal power than most regular community members. How do you try to sort of balance the power dynamics in mediation if you see this kind of thing show up?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really great question. Absolutely. So the first thing, there's two things actually we do primarily. One is we require really that the officers show up in plain clothes, because the uniform communicates power, right? And they're even on they're working, so if they have their weapon, we can't ask them to leave that, but it's concealed. No one can. So they're showing up as a community member. And then what we do when we first begin the mediation is we ask both of the participants to share who they are in the community, and we kind of name it, and we try to move it out of this particular power dynamic. It's like, look, you're a community member, the officer is a community member in their community. And so is the community member, obviously, that was, maybe where the incident occurred. So this is all about leveling this kind of, power dynamics and this idea that this is an officer still in X, Y, and Z. Now, this is the thing. Just because they take the uniform off doesn't mean that they take the uniform off, because oftentimes they respond from this place of authority because that's what they're taught. And so as a mediator, we kind of have to ask questions and get to the underlying issues, break out in caucuses and do that kind of thing. But excellent question. Those are some of the things that we do to mitigate the power dynamics, but a great question.
Thank you very much, Shaf. And I don't know, I mean, it makes me kind of sort of think about a couple of things, again, about this kind of sort of difference of perceptions. I mean, I was stopped relatively recently. It was, I'd come to a rolling stop or whatever the case was, and it was nighttime. But what you get, I mean, you get the lights in the background, you get one officer here, you get another officer coming round the back with the torch looking into the car, behind you, you've got no idea what's going on. And, from your perspective, it's like, I mean, it's scary, it's unnecessary, it's offensive, right? Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, perhaps understandably, from that person's perspective, well, safety is paramount. They're in a very risky job and taking the necessary steps to stay safe. So once again, kind of sort of a testament to your and your group's skill to be able to kind of sort of manage those different perspectives and power dynamics. And there's a question from Chip. Oh, and just very quickly, because I did read a New York Times article about this thing about how long we can look at each other without being offended. And I think that the East Coast was a lot worse off than the West Coast was. But, in a variety of cultures around the world, I think it was in Afghanistan, you can hold a gaze for like 4 seconds without it being offensive to anybody. Whereas in New York, it was like 0.2 seconds or something like that, and you're done for, So I just wanted to reflect on that. But I'm going to rephrase a question from Chip. I hope you don't mind me rephrasing it, Chip. And that is, how have you kind of sort of, what tips or tricks, or have you been most successful in being able to sort of build your networks? What are the messages that resonate the most quickly, that have enabled you to be able to sort of meet new people, to be able to discuss what you do, or to be able to get them on board as a partner?
Consistency. You have to be consistent in what you do. A lot of times I've seen a lot of organizations, they have a bad showing, they do something, only a few people show up, and they just stop. Or they have something and there's a bad day and they don't get the result that they want, they stop. You have to keep doing this over and over and over and over again. When we first started, there were times when I would have an event and we would plan it out and we would spend months planning and 4 people would show up. And, it's discouraging because you think in your mind you have a really great product or idea and only 4 people show up. But as you keep going, you realize that people are skeptical about change. They don't trust you because they know that there are so many times where they can come out one minute and support something and it's gone the next. So you have to be consistent and you have to keep the quality of what you're doing consistent. So you can't bring it down, water down, or bring it down weak. You have to keep it going. I give the same energy in one of my events, whether it's 4 people, 400 people, 4,000 people. You're going to get the same energy every time. So you have to be consistent in what you do.
Go ahead, Pastor Man, please.
I just want to add to that. I think that's really good, Perry. I agree. I don't know if you ever heard John Lewis talk. John Lewis, before he died, would tell people that even though he was a preacher, he started out preaching to the chickens before. And one of the things we know as people in the faith-based community is we have the same experience that Perry does. We have no idea how many people are going to show up on a given Sunday morning. But the same is true when it comes to this issue. As I said, we've been working at IPAC, the Interfaith Peace and Action Collaborative, for the last 5.5 years. So sometimes in the early days, there would be, 10 people or 15 people, and then as many as 50 the next time around. And today, on average, even though there have been people who've come and gone, on average, we'll get about anywhere between 50 and 70 people. Last night, we had our table event where we really showcased people that were doing great things in the community to try to keep people from the criminal justice system. And the first time we did it, we had 125 people that showed up. Last night, which was the first night thing we did, we had 75 people show up. And so I think consistency is one. I think commitment is the other. I think keeping things interesting and recognizing that you're not going to sugarcoat anything. That when people come, they don't have to show up with a different face, that people can literally be authentic. And I think the issue of authenticity is so important, because otherwise people will assume that you're wasting their time, right? And so those things I would add to it, and I'm sure Shafin is going to add to it as well. I'm looking at the time, so I don't want to preach again.
I'm good. All I want to add, I'll just add, just drop a little bit. But the only thing is, I would say you want to find out. Again, I'm all about why are people showing up? Like, why is it meaningful for them to be there? And so and if your mission or your organization is with IPAC, they're impacting change, real change, and people want to be a part of that, and so they're going to show up and do that. For me, I work with a lot of different government partners and agencies, and so I have to find out why are you here? How can I create value? How can we create value together? And then beyond that, it's relationships too. So even when I'm talking to the community member, I'll be honest with you, we have a very high level of people not being interested in showing up to the table to mediate. I have to figure out, how do we solve that problem? How do we have a conversation that we can quickly build trust and build a relationship that's going to get them to not distrust government, not have a disbelief and not want to show up, and just I can go golfing or do whatever, and show up and actually have this conversation. So it is a challenge, but that's the thing, and also the consistency thing. Everything else everybody else said, absolutely on point and correct. So
that's excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Much appreciated there. I'm going to try and squeeze in one additional question. This question is from Hannah Levine. Can you expand on how you build anti-racist practices into your peacebuilding work between communities and law enforcement?
Well, I might say something about that, Michael, and I wouldn't. And again, speaking of the lens, Perry speaking was and we have his work in Richland County and Columbia goes back so far. Actually, the Richland County Sheriff's Department is watching this call and learning so much and benefiting so much from these panelists, and they've been doing this work for decades. And so, from the perspective of officers, they wouldn't use that framing. Right? They would use the framing of, they have communities of color and they have people they deal with. For the communities, they may use the word framing in terms of racist. The real question is, how can we build trust and transparency and restore the confidence in policing, right? And then from that perspective, from the communities of color, how do we eliminate things which are seen as racist? And actually, in law enforcement data, show up as biases, show up as tendencies, when it is really true, there are racial disparities in aspects of law enforcement. The truth is, as Pastor Matt pointed out, it's extremely complex when you deal with policing. And so it's not that you build it in, it's that you build community. The police is part of the community and the community is part of the police. And that is one way to do that with not turning a blind eye and not whitewashing the fact that there are disparities which do need to be looked at, and they need to be examined by the community and the agency working together. And they need to bring those into focus so that they can actually be changed. from both the community's perspective and from the agency's perspective. I know Pastor Matt and Shafin probably have a lot to say about that, as well as Perry.
Can I?
Oh, go ahead, Shafin. Go ahead.
Let me just add this, and it will be short. So look, I totally agree with that. It's about everything that Lisa said, and I want to just add this part though, that there is a power to like being honest and truth telling, right? Like in terms of the historical, like we got it. So I feel like, okay, I've been in mediations where officers have said, I don't understand. I'm not racist. I didn't, all their history, all that baggage, I had nothing to do with. And I'm like, yeah, but you're wearing a uniform that represents a history beyond you that you have to be responsible for in some way. And the thing is, oftentimes these officers, they show up and they're not educated to the historical weight that this legacy they're carrying, because that's not the background they come from. You know, I'm very familiar with it. You know, I actually do teaching and training on it, and I use it. I parallel music, because you can look at the music that we've listened to as a culture, and you can parallel the times and what was going on within society in that way. And so it's really interesting, I think. And so that is, I just kind of offer a broader framework, and so that officers can understand it's not necessarily them, because they may themselves not be, you know, identify as biased or racist or whatever the case is, and that's okay. But it's like, can you understand that there's some things that happen historically here that framed it for them, though, framed it for like their father and then their son, and then these things get passed down even if they themselves haven't. There's this legacy, this narrative that you're dealing with, and so let's talk about it from that perspective. So I try to create a place where we can come together and not push people away.
I so agree with what Shafin and Lisa have shared, and I just want to add to that. We've got to be patient with each other, using terms like racist or non-racist or whatever. It's a non-starter in almost every conversation. Now, that doesn't mean that we should whitewash it. It means that, much like what Shafin just said, one has to understand this uniform represents a certain thing, right? And when people hear it that way, prayerfully, they don't take it as personal. When I say that we've got to be patient with each other, now Shafin and Perry are good-looking guys. They may not have the same problem that I do. But every night, if I get called out at 2:30 in the morning in Portland, I promise you, if I'm going to be very careful about how I drive my car. If the speed limit says 35, I'm going to put cruise control on so that there's no way that I can be stopped for going too fast. Now, I'm just going to say amen myself. You guys may not have this, but this is what we are conscious of, the fact that if we get stopped at 2:30 in the morning, no matter what positions we carry, we have the opportunity potentially to open ourselves up to a very dangerous situation. So I would say to you that what I've seen in my work and what I've seen white officers admit is that when they walk up to a car and it's a black or brown person who's driving, it does cause them some pause. The majority, not everybody, but the majority. Is just a reality. Our job is to do everything that we can to try to disengage that very kind of feeling. And so our work, all of us, is just a recognition that's the way it is, but we are the pioneers that prayerfully, if we do our work right, 40 years from now, our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will not be dealing with the same thing.
Well, I'm going to interject with a little bit of stuff. So one of the things I've learned, especially working so closely with Richland County, is that majority of times an officer pulls up on a car during a traffic stop, with the tinted windows we have nowadays, they don't know if the person in the car is black or white. So that, you know, in a sense, that happens. You ask an officer what's going on in his mind, he just wants to get home. You ask a black person what's going on in their mind, they'll tell you that, oh, we got pulled over because of the color of our skin. Same thing if you ask a white person, they're going to tell you, oh, he's okay. You know, I must have did something wrong. You know, so you get different answers from different people. But one of the biggest things is if you're not willing to address it with truthful and honesty, and I think Pastor Mack said the same thing. If you're not willing to be honest with it, don't sugarcoat. Just be totally honest with it. You think about it. more African Americans will tell you that they have been treated unfairly by whites when it comes to police and the justice system. And white officers have to understand that as well. When you come up on African American, you know the history. You know, even though you're not that officer who may have done something, you know the history. And at the same time, we as African Americans got to realize, how many times have we honestly seen a police officer roll up on scene and every black person on the scene treat them with disrespect? You know, they talk down on them, call them names, and the officer has to deal with that. They don't have that luxury of being able to respond the way the community responds to them. You know, I felt bad because there have been times I've invited Sheriff Lott to an event and the community has lashed out at him. It was like, man, I felt like I set him up. But then at the same time, his response is always proper and respectful. So when we start doing that on both sides, that's how we're going to address that racism, because we can easily give it as much as it's given. And don't get me wrong, we can't negate what happened in the past, but moving forward, I believe we have to start realizing that where each of us come from and why we feel the way we feel, and be kind of respectful on both ends of the spectrum for that.
That's absolutely wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions. Reverend Pastor Matt, did you want to say anything else?
Thank you, Michael. No, I was just wanting to say amen to what Perry and what Shafin and Lisa have said. And I just thought an amen was due.
I think if anybody knew when the appropriate time for an amen was, you're the man. So thank you very much for that, and amen. It's been a fantastic, insightful, educational, and very engaging conversation. Thank you very much, Shafin Roberts, Perry Bradley, Pastor Matt, Jim Berman, Lisa Broderick. Thank you very much for your contribution today. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. I sense that there's going to be a lot more conversations, not only between us, but with the audience as well, who's engaged wonderfully during this time. So we very much look forward to staying in touch with all of you, and enjoy what remains of PeaceCon. Thanks again.
Awesome. Y'all take care.